Well, good morning, and you're very welcome to the first presentation today on history. My name is Patrick Hagan. I lecture in Irish and American history here at Trinity. And, well, first of all, what I'd say is, if you want to talk to someone who's actually studying history, I would recommend that after this, just go over to the Graduate Memorial Building, because we have student ambassadors from every county, and there's a whole Leinster panel of ambassadors there until 10:30. We have then ambassadors from Munster up until 12, from 12 to 1:30 ambassadors from Connacht, and then from 1:30 to 3 we have ambassadors from Ulster. There's one over there, Ronan, who's studying history. There's a few over there from history, but I ran into two of the people who are in the back there, and I was chatting to them, and Ronan was giving them all the chat about doing history, and I asked them, what's the thing I should say at 10 o'clock to the group in the Burke? And they said, just say, do history. So that's what I'm going to do. Secondly, I asked them, would they allow me to plant a question with them? And that way it would make me look incredibly knowledgeable about history, like something completely obscure that they could just ask around a question, like, in what year did Einstein? And I would just go, well, I think you're referring to his paper in 1919. Now, I'm not an expert in this. Sadly, they did not agree to that. But what I'd like to tell you about why you should do history and why you should think about doing history in Trinity. The first and only reason, the most important reason, is that it is fun. It's that you will enjoy it. Because there's something distinctive about studying history, or indeed studying anything at Trinity. It's a 4-year degree. And that might seem a little strange. Why do you need an extra year in Trinity? If everywhere else is offering a 3-year degree, does that mean that you're just a bit slower in Trinity and you need that extra year to catch up with everyone else? And the answer is, the 4-year degree is actually very different from a 3-year degree because it allows you to become the historian yourself. It's a research-inspired curriculum. It means that in the first 2 years, you are doing broad survey courses on American history, on Irish history, on British history, on French and European history, all around the world. But then in your 3rd and 4th year, you're able to specialize. You're able to say, I want to do a course on Nazi Germany. I want to do a course on, say, the American presidency. I want to do a course on Ireland in the revolutionary period, 1913 to 1923. I want to do something about Britain in the Second World War. And it also means that in your final year, you can do an independent project, a dissertation, on any topic you want, where you are going into the archives and researching that topic. So it's not about reading books and learning off answers. You get rid of that as soon as you enter first year. It's about you reading, analysing, interpreting. You as the historian saying, well, those historians, I wouldn't agree with that. And in fact, this evidence. And as you go on, you're not just reading other historians, you're actually reading the sources that they're reading. You're going into the archives. You're reading Hitler's diary or correspondence. You're reading letters. You're reading speeches, parliamentary debates. You're reading Churchill's private papers. And therefore, you're seeing how the historians have interpreted them and whether they've interpreted them correctly. And there's nothing more exciting than that. So what it means is that at the end of the 4 years, it's almost as if you've done a master's. Because you're at that level where you are the historian yourself. That you're able to say, well, what were the causes of the First World War? It's not just historian A says this, and historian B says something else. You're able to know what they said, but you also have your own views. And your own views have been informed by your own independent research. So, in other words, Trinity is not a place that you come to be taught. It's a place where you come to learn. It's a place where you come to be inspired by the subject that you love. Now, with history, you can either do it as a single honours subject, which means it's all history, or you can do it as a joint subject shared with something else. A lot of people like to do it with English or French. There's a history and political science course. Now, I think it's really about what suits you best. And at a at 2 o'clock I'm giving talks about choosing the right course, choosing the right degree. I think it's really about what you, in your heart, would really like to do. Sometimes people like 2 subjects because maybe they would like to go into teaching, or maybe they like 2 subjects equally, and they don't really want to give one up. They love English, they also love history. They love history, they also love classics. And I think that's perfectly legitimate. I think there are certain advantages of doing history as a single honours course, because it means that you have essentially double the modules in history. It means that everything is about developing that methodology. But in a way, I don't think it really matters, because in your 4th year, you're able to specialise in one of the 2 subjects, if that's what you want. So, and you'll still have the opportunity to do a dissertation in the final year. So I don't think it really matters. It's about what you are going to do best at. And you'll only do well at something if you love it. So if you love 2 subjects, do 2 subjects. If you think you love history a lot more, then I think you should do history. And I don't think you're disadvantaged doing specialist history. And I think if that's your love, then you'll really enjoy that. We are here in the Emmet Theatre. This is the largest theatre in the arts block. It's named after one of Trinity's greatest graduates. He entered here in the 1740s. He established the debating society that's still going strong, the College Historical Society. He was the person who became one of the key political thinkers, not only in the 18th century, but of any century. He was a British parliamentarian. He wrote about the French Revolution. He explored the injustices in India, in Ireland, in America. He was a champion of the oppressed. And in a way, we honour him with this theatre, with a statue at the front gate of Trinity as you enter here. I'll tell you something very briefly about some of the stuff that I teach, because in a way, every lecturer here has their own interests, their own passions. If you go to the other history talk, you'll have Kieran Brady, and he's an expert on 19th century history writing and the reign of Queen Elizabeth. He'll give you a completely different talk. David Ditchburn is giving one after 1 o'clock. He's giving one, and he's a medievalist. He talks about Braveheart, and he's got a very different set of interests. What I do is I teach American history. If you go into 1st year, we have a module on American history from the settling of the colonies all the way up to the present day. And in that, we pretty much explore everything. The assassination of JFK, who really did it? I always say, love a good man, students are never convinced. We talk about the Gettysburg Address. Everyone's heard about the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's great oration on one of the great battlefields in 1863. But how many of you know that that speech was only 2 minutes long? And when he delivered that speech, everyone thought it was a flop. Because it was the consecration of a national cemetery. It was the battlefield where 3 months previously, hundreds of thousands had been massacred. And people were expecting a big event. And they had the president of Harvard, a man called Everett, deliver a speech. And he spoke for 2 hours. And he gave this booming address. And everyone applauded and thought, that's a great oration. And then the president of the United States got up and he went to the platform to speak. And the photographer got the tripod out and was ready to take the picture. But it took a few minutes for the photographer to get the camera ready. And by the end of the 2 minutes, just as the photographer was ready to take the picture, Lincoln sat down. The speech was over. And he got barely polite applause. And some of the newspapers wrote about how embarrassed they were, that they had to point out to foreigners that this man was meant to be our president, because people were expecting something different. But because the speech was so short, it was less than 400 words, all the newspapers covered it. Everyone published it. And as people began to read it, they began to realize that in these 400 words, it had captured more brilliantly than any other speech, any other piece of writing about what the war was about. You know, Lincoln ended with the famous lines about how a government of the people, for the people, by the people, should not be allowed to perish from the earth. And that resonated with people. And the guy who had given the 2-hour speech wrote to Lincoln and he said, can I have a copy of your speech? You said better in 2 minutes than what I tried to do in So in a way, what we try and do in our history class is we try and talk about things like that, but kind of maybe challenge, look at it from a different perspective, look at it in a different way, so that it's a slightly different angle. And then we get our students to explore themselves what they think about something like the American Civil War. Was the South right to secede? Could Hawaii secede now from the United States if it wanted to? Or would that be an unconstitutional act? Why did the North win the Civil War and why did the South lose? Was Lincoln a better president than Jefferson Davis in the South? And did that influence things? We look at the Daniel Day-Lewis movie when that comes out. Is that an accurate reflection of does that capture, and apparently Daniel Day-Lewis, who I absolutely do think is an amazing actor, apparently his voice is very controversial now in America because he doesn't play Lincoln with a great dramatic booming voice. He kind of plays it with a slightly odd and kind of weedy voice. But that's because Daniel Day-Lewis did his research, and that's how people describe the voice. And again, it was the content that was really important for people and not the style of delivery. Kevin Costner is someone who makes a big appearance in my lectures. You could actually show the entire course of American history through Kevin Costner movies. We have Dances with Wolves, where he begins as a Union soldier. You have Wyatt Earp and the reimagining of the West. You have The Untouchables, when he's helping to bring down Al Capone. You have 13 Days, when he's one of JFK's advisors during the Cuban Missile Crisis. You have JFK, where he's trying to investigate the assassination. You have The Bodyguard, where it's revealed that he was one of the bodyguards at Ronald Reagan's detail when Ronald Reagan got shot, but he feels guilty. He wasn't there. He was burying his mother. And you have The Postman, set in the future, although it was made in the 90s and set in 2013, and not really come to pass. And actually, what we do in those is we explore just how historically inaccurate, or how they reinvent movies. Like in the Wild West, you didn't really have gunfights. They're a Hollywood invention. The fact that in The Untouchables, Al Capone is built up to be this figure, as indeed, because he was mythologized. In fact, he was seen as quite a minor crime figure by the police and the FBI. But he's been mythologized. How in 13 Days, the way they manipulate things there. In JFK, they have Garrison, the character, as this truthful defender of everything, whereas in fact, he was someone who suffered from severe mental health problems. Kevin Costner, he's a man we can laugh at. He's a man that we can also learn much from. And so there's things like that. In Irish history, we have great things. We talk about how the Irish state came about, how the Irish nation developed over the centuries. We look at figures like Daniel O'Connell. We look at the 1916 Rising. But again, we explore the debates about things like commemoration. How should you commemorate the 1916 Rising? How should we commemorate the First World War? In 2 years' time, we're going to be remembering the 100-year anniversary of the start of the First World War. That was a war that for many years afterwards, maybe 80, 90 years afterwards, we in Ireland were uncomfortable addressing the fact that Irishmen had fought and died in that conflict. It was something that was almost written out of the history. How should we remember that? Because at one point we don't want to glorify war, and of all wars, that was, you could say, one of the most meaningless, one of the most brutal and tragic and horrific. But how do we honor the men who served there? And there are interesting debates there that we have. But it's not that we give you the answer. There is no answer. You come up with the answers. We form a learning community where we're learning from each other, where every point of view is respected, that we ask you to go off and research things and read about things and then talk to us about what you find. That you learn from the person sitting beside you as much as you do from the person who's sitting up here. So you have some classes that are like this, a lecture, where the person stands here or roams around, and then you have small tutorials and seminars where you're in groups. And that's a key thing with us in Trinity, small group learning, where you'll have tutorials of 8 people, very small seminars, where you're giving presentations, you're learning from each other, you're teasing out things and having debates. And then we have bigger kinds of debates as well. I just want to show you one clip. And this is a debate that I do every year with my third and fourth years, because it's a course on Ireland in the period of the 1790s, when you had the 1798 rebellion. Also, it looks at Daniel O'Connell and the winning of Catholic emancipation, Robert Emmet's rebellion in 1803. But one of the key events in that was the abolition of the Irish Parliament, when Britain decided to rule directly from London. And that happened in 1800. And they used a lot of bribery and corruption to get it through. But our students then reenact those debates. They all take the part of one of the great parliamentarians of the day, Henry Grattan, Castlereagh, Ponsonby. And they're asked in a 4-minute speech to reimagine, to redo the speech in the language of the present, to capture the essential personality of the person, to capture the essential truth of their arguments. And then we debate it out in the actual chamber where these debates took place. And actually, after the Union, the Bank of Ireland purchased that building for £40,000. You may be reading in the papers, there's a debate now in the government about what should happen with it. Should it turn into a national tourist site? Trinity actually tried to buy that building because it thought, what a brilliant place for having lectures. The old Parliament building. You actually have this amazing chamber. And Trinity tried to buy it. And do you know why the government refused? They were afraid that the students, being a rowdy bunch, would get into fights when they were leaving the gate and crossing over the streets. Because there were a lot of street traders, and they were afraid the Trinity students would kick over the stalls. And the then provost of the university suggested building tunnels, and that way the students wouldn't have to see anyone, and they could go back and forth. But the governments weren't convinced, and they sold it to Bank of Ireland. But we use it for class events, we use it for debates. The great thing about being in this city centre location is we're able to do things like visit Glasnevin Cemetery and look at the O'Connell Monument, things like that, Dublin Castle, Kilmainham Jail, and it's a way of bringing a lot of this history alive. And it's a way of kind of capturing some of the excitement about it. But this is just a short video, just of a few minutes long, of one time when we did this debate, and just to give you a flavour of the kinds of things, because again, it's very different from school history. It's not about memorising a lot of facts. In fact, once you come into college, that's not important at all. It doesn't matter whether something happened in January 1916 or February. We don't really care about that. You can just say it happened in 1916. What we care about is why it happened, not when it happened, and what were the reasons, what are the interpretations. The dates don't matter at all. And it's a very liberating experience then, because it's no longer about ticking the box, having the right answer, the 6 right answers for anything. And it's about exploring things yourself. So, and we're not just about then developing writing skills, it's also about presentation skills, teamwork skills. It's about giving you a wider education, and doing debates like this is a good way of doing it.
I know that having been educated on the topic by Dr. Geoghegan, you will have realised by now that not all those who supported the Union were villains, although quite a lot of them were, and not all those who opposed it were heroes, although a much smaller percentage of them were.
Sir, may I present to you the Golden Circle, the progressive and democratic men who have wasted away in order to bring the much desired union that seeks to improve the relationship between the Isles of Britain and Ireland, and shall strengthen the union to the very core.
Again I warn you, do not dare to attack the Constitution, it is above your power.
Hear, hear.
We must ask, what makes this renewed union measure such a menacing threat?
But what is its cause, I ask you? It is, as with most things, religion. And Europe has been for many centuries divided into prods and papists.
They can preserve their liberty, yet they can increase their power.
Well, we saw my third and fourth year history students reenacting the debates over the Act of Union. So they were the debates that would have taken place in this very chamber. We don't need to hear him. And to make it a little bit, of a challenge to them, we actually have it. It's always done the week before Christmas. And the winning team of good teamwork, sometimes to dress up in the costumes. And I tell them at the beginning, this isn't like one of those debates where at the end I'll say, you are all winners. No, there's going to be a winning team and a losing team. And the losing team will have to do that essay over the Christmas. And that focuses the minds completely. We look at things like Robert Emmet, who in reaction to the Union then, led a rebellion. He was a Trinity student. He was kicked out of this university in 1798. And 205 years later, in 2003, we renamed the lecture theatre after it, just upstairs there. And it's always a good lesson that even though things may go horribly wrong for you in Trinity, if you just become famous enough afterwards, we will someday recognise you and reward you. But it was here in Trinity. Emmet is now famous for not the rebellion, which was a failure, but for his speech from the dock. Because of the fact that when he was sentenced to death, he delivered an oration that is viewed as one of the greatest speeches in history, where he talked about how he did not want his epitaph to be written until Ireland had taken her place among the nations of the earth. And he was taken out, and he was hanged and beheaded the very next day. And that speech went all around the world. Abraham Lincoln memorized that speech as a young man. At the end of the Civil War, he pardoned a young spy sentenced to death because he made a speech that reminded him of young Emmet. But it was here in Trinity that Emmet developed his style of oratory. And it was in the debating society across the way that Edmund Burke had founded that he perfected his skills. And in fact, he became so good as speaker that the government began to worry that he was corrupting the student body, that he was turning all the Trinity students into radicals. And so they began attending the debates and watching him. And they saw that he was raising them up, talking about injustices in ancient Greece and Rome, because they weren't allowed to talk about modern day politics, but leaving his listeners in no doubt that he was actually referring to modern day injustices. And they actually invited back a former debater, a successful lawyer called Geraghty, just for the purpose of taking on Emmet and destroying his reputation. And there was a huge debate over there in the GMB in 1798, on the last day of February, where Emmet delivered this brilliant speech, and then Geraghty began making fun of him and teasing him. And Emmet was invited to respond, and he began a speech, and he always had this way of stretching out the palm of his hand, pleading with his listeners, and tapping out his arguments with these two fingers. And Geraghty began to interrupt him. And Geraghty began to jeer him and heckle him. And for the first time in his life, Emmet was beaten. He wasn't used to these tactics, and he didn't know how to deal with it. He lost concentration. He forgot what he was trying to say, and he just stopped. And there was a long, embarrassed silence, and then he apologized and sat down. And Thomas Moore, his great childhood friend, who would later immortalize him in verse, said that it left all of us on the radical side embarrassed to see our chief champion humiliated like that. And a month later, Emmet was expelled from Trinity. He had finished all his exams, but they didn't want to, and he tried to withdraw his name rather than be expelled. And the government said, no, we want the pleasure of expelling young Emmet ourselves. And I think what you see, though, from that is that although Emmet's Trinity career came to an end, and it came to an end with quite a humiliating defeat, he learned from that humiliation. That was his last public oration until a speech from the dock 5 years later. And when the judge, Lord Norbury, tried the exact same tactics as Geraghty, this time he was prepared for them, and this time he knew how to handle them. So when the judge, Lord Norbury, said, Mr. Emmet, I can't allow you to continue your speech, he interrupted him 8 times in his speech. He interrupted him and said, Mr. Emmet, I can't allow you to go on. You know, your father was a very distinguished man in this country. Your father was the state physician. It's a good job he's dead, because if he was alive, he'd be ashamed of what you've done. And Emmet said, no. No. It was my father who taught me to love the principles of liberty. My father taught me as a young man to believe in Irish independence. And I know that if my father is in heaven looking down on me, I know he would be proud of what I've done. And it was said that the judge was so moved by Emmet's speech, he broke down in tears in the end. Now, he still sentenced him to death. But that was what Emmet learned here in Trinity. And I think that's the excitement of the Trinity education. It doesn't matter whether you're studying history or law or physics or medicine. There is something common to all of these courses. It's a 4-year degree, in some cases 5, but it's a 4-year degree where we're not just preparing you for one job. We're preparing you for life. We're preparing you for lots of jobs. We're giving you a set of skills, a way of solving problems, of thinking about the world, of thinking about yourselves. And some of that you learn in the classroom, and some of that you learn in the debating societies, and the clubs, and the film societies, and all of that. A lot of it you learn from each other. We provide a forum where you meet people, not just from your own county, but from all of Ireland, and from all around the world. Where you meet people with all different kinds of views, some completely opposed to you. You meet lecturers who will challenge you, no matter what your point of view is. If you say, I think Robert Emmet is great, I'll say, well, why? He led a rebellion that was a complete failure. If you say, I think Robert Emmet was terrible, I'll say, why? Did he not give a speech that inspired loads of people? It's all about teasing things out. So there's no lazy assumptions, there's no lazy answers, there's no right answers. It's about exploring this together, and we're in this. So that's why I think history is, in a way, perfectly suited to that kind of education. Because we have the whole of the past to explore. And as I say, in that final year, you can do a dissertation on whatever you want. An aspect of the American Civil War, something about Nixon and his impeachment, something about Braveheart, something about how World War I has been commemorated. You become the historian, and that's what we're here to help you become. And while you're becoming the historian, you're also learning a range of other skills that will be important for you, whether you decide to go into a career in teaching, or a career in law, or a career in the media, or a career that you don't even have any clue now what you would like that to be. That doesn't matter, because we'll equip you with the kind of education that will help you in whatever you go into. That's the Trinity education, and that's one of the good things about studying history. But I think only do it if you love it. Because there's a lot of reading involved. There's a lot of debating, there's a lot of writing. So if it's something you're only half into, then you should follow your passion. If your passion is English, you should do that. If your passion is politics, you should do that. If your passion is science, you should do that. I think the worst thing you could do is pick something because you're trying to second guess what will help you get a job in 4 years' time. The best thing is to see what kind of degree, what kind of person will this education help you to become. And the more passionate you are coming in, well then, I think that's better for you when you're leaving. Okay, so I'll wrap it up in a few minutes, but are there questions that people have? Are there things you would like to ask? Do you have any questions about the kinds of options you would be studying in a history degree? Any planted questions that I know? Thank you, guys. No, not finishing. We're finishing on an inspirational end point. I haven't quite worked it out yet, but no. But no! What time is it? Oh, we're actually almost out of time. Okay. That's not good. Okay, we still have about 5 minutes. We were given 35 minutes. No, I'm going to end with some rallying cry. But no, we must have some questions. I can't have answered everything.
There's one here.
Yes. Is there a course? Yes, we do have, Dr. Alpor gives one on Soviet politics. It's an option in 3rd and 4th year. So some years there are some options available. If the person is away on research leave or something, they might go. But because of the 3rd and 4th year cycle, luckily if you don't get it 1 year, you can get it in the other. And also, there are great opportunities. If you have foreign languages, that's brilliant because you can then go over and work in those archives. And therefore, you're using not just translations of the documents, but the original source. If you don't have foreign language, well then, you can work on stuff in British archives, or Irish ones, or American, or Australian. But really, there's opportunities to explore things for anything in global history. And in 1st year, you do a mixture of survey courses, modern history, medieval history. And medieval history is so different, and that's almost what's so exciting about it. Because it's giving you the foundations of the world, the foundations of history. And because it's so different from the Leaving Cert. But I would say that it is very different from the Leaving Cert because it's not about the dates and it's not about memorization. If you don't have great memory skills, you can still do brilliantly in college because it's about the ideas. It's about the why rather than the what. It's about why you think that happened, not on what day it happened. And it's really about kind of exploring the debates about history. Could Hitler have won in the Second World War? Could Robert Emmet rebellion have succeeded? Could the 1916 Rising have succeeded? How should we commemorate the First World War? Things like that. So really, there are debates where you are the historian, your voice is the one that matters. Do we have any other questions? Yes?
Is it possible to finish the 4-year course without ever doing Irish history?
No. No. We do have something in the first 2 years where you do a certain number of medieval, certain number of Irish, and certain number of other courses. And the reason for that, now certainly in 3rd and 4th year, you can drop Irish history completely. You don't have to do anything. In 3rd and 4th year, you can drop medieval history, not do anything. In 3rd and 4th year, you can drop modern history and just do medieval. So in 3rd and 4th year, you have a huge amount of freedom. In 1st and 2nd year, though, we do believe it's important to give you a broad range of skills and knowledge. And there would be a certain belief that because we're, an Irish university, we should be giving you some overview of Irish history, the same way some overview of world history and some overview of medieval. But by 3rd year, if you hate it, it's gone. Tom, yes?
How many modules do you do 1st and 2nd year?
You do 60 credits in each year, and if you're doing, say, single honours, it's full 60. If it's 2 subjects, it's 30. And that can be, I think it's 2 10s and 2 5s each semester. So so it's between 3 and 4, say, in a semester. And it's a mixture of everything. Like doing history is a module you do in 1st year. Everyone does that, and it's about visiting local museums and collections. It's about you do a portfolio, and instead of an exam, they have a big debate at the end, and I'm chairing it. And this year it's about this house believes that history repeats itself. So it's a way of one side arguing, the other, and teams are again, and then we have book prizes. There's no essay thing because they're a bit nicer in the 1st year. And that's a good one, yes?
Where does some of your practice
Pretty everywhere. Not only everywhere in Ireland, but around the world. Sometimes some are working in politics in America or in consultancies in the UK. Some are working in media here. Some go on and do law. Some go into teaching. One of my history students is teaching at the Belfast Royal Academy. To be honest, go into lots of different kinds of things. And very often it's not history. Sometimes they go work for museums or libraries where history training is important, but sometimes it's a completely different career. Some go to work for Google because Google like people who can think independently, and that's what we try and do, help you to think independently. So, we're almost out of time. What is the inspirational message that I can give? I don't know. I would say that doing history in Trinity is something that is a lot of fun, it's a lot of work, it's challenging. It is an opportunity to find out what you really think about issues, to challenge any assumptions you might have, to challenge any beliefs. It is a lot of fun, but I think any degree that you do is a way of exploring. I would love for you to come back next year or the year after. We would love to have you in Trinity. We would love you to be part of our Trinity community because we see ourselves as a community of students and staff working together. We will try and give you the very best education that we can do. We are sorry that the points are so ridiculously ridiculous. We don't think it's the best system. We are trying to reform that, but for the moment, it's all that we've got. And it's unfortunately supply and demand. And don't let the points put you off. Points are only a reflection of the number of places available. It doesn't mean that you must have 6 A's to be able to do this course. It just means that unfortunately that's the filtering mechanism that we have. So don't let points be your guide. Put it down on your CAO in the order of what you love. And I hope to see you back. If you do come back, please take my American history course. I will solve the JFK assassination for you. I will show you Kevin Costner. We're not allowed to use this time to press for our own courses. But I'm going to break that rule and say, do the American history one. You will have a lot of fun, but I think to have a lot of fun with whatever you do. And good luck in the Leaving Cert. It's a horrible exam, but do your best and enjoy the next rest of the day.